We've hit 1 o'clock, so we should go ahead and begin. Now, for those of you who are here expecting pearls of wisdom, well, I hope that a few come, but that's due to the eternal, not to me. I am not an expert in time management or necessarily locating free time, but I've learned some things about time over the years. So as you can see up here on the screen, we are asking ourselves if we're too busy for God, and we want to find time for spiritual connection. So I have brought some material with me today that I hope will help you. And as we go through the 4 parts of this presentation, when we get to the back end, I have some questions for discussion. So my hope is that based on what you've heard today, you can find something that interests you, piques your interest, and you'll want to discuss that either among yourselves or perhaps with the group as a whole. So please keep that in mind. So our first part is we have time to spend. That might be an interesting concept to think about from this point of view. So does anybody think about time as a kind of income, an increase that you're given each week? Has anybody thought about that? Anybody ever had that thought? Okay, we have a few people who have. Do you recognize this gentleman? Okay, most people will recognize this gentleman. Well, he's one of the first people that I became aware of that talks about time as money. So that quotation comes directly from something he wrote in the middle of the 18th century. Benjamin Franklin, as many of you realize, did serve on the Constitutional Committee. He helped form the Constitution of the United States. He served as an ambassador to France, but many people don't know that he retired at age 42. He was able to do all of those things in the second half of his life. As I recall, he died at age 84. So for the second half of his life, he had the wealth he needed from his printing press and from other businesses that he had in order to be about the business of forming a brand new nation. So with that in mind, we have this concept. I learned this as a 20-something. Here's another one that I learned. Dost thou love life? Then do not squander time, for that is the stuff that life is made of. Once again, a concept that focuses on what it means to have a time income. So the first one comes from advice to a young man. The second one comes from his persona, Poor Richard, in a publication called The Way to Wealth. And as you can imagine, somebody who had that kind of experience had learned to manage time pretty well and thought of time as a kind of income, as something like money to spend. He had some interesting thoughts. So I'll convey those, share those with you now. Does anybody recognize this gentleman? Most people probably won't. So let's go with his quotation first. It comes from the first chapter of his book that he published in the 1850s. The cost of a thing is the amount of what I will call life which is required to be exchanged for it. I became aware of this quotation when I was 20-something, and it helped me to think about budgeting time, making use of time as a kind of income. So for some of you who might have an inkling of who this gentleman was, we're talking about Henry David Thoreau. He was a protege of Ralph Waldo Emerson. Once again, going back to the middle of the 19th century in America. So it's interesting that a couple of famous Americans, one from the 18th century, one from the 19th century, thought about time as income and perhaps time as a monetary instrument, or at least increments of time would be a monetary instrument if we think about the analogy. Does anybody recognize this gentleman? Well, you probably shouldn't, because it's an artist's rendering of an extinguished gentleman. I should say distinguished gentleman. By the way, for anybody who's just joined us, we have a handout and a pen for each person over here on your right. There are a couple of chairs back there. Well, you'll recognize the quotation as soon as you see it. To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the heaven. Once again, somebody going back in time who was thinking about time in increments and, if you will, allotments. So that metaphor will play a role in where we go later in this presentation. Of course, we're talking about King Solomon. He's otherwise known as the preacher in Ecclesiastes, and you see this comes from chapter 3, verse 1. One more biblical example so that we aren't relying too much on the secular world. We're making good use of the biblical world. Anybody recognize this gentleman? The caption on the side helps give it away. Once again, an artist's rendering. So this comes from the Apostle Paul. See that ye walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time, and for our purposes, redeeming the time means rescuing it from possible loss, is a good interpretation of what redeeming means in this context. Because the days are evil. The word evil here from the King James is probably a little too strong, but it might represent the mindset of Elizabethans. If we go back to the late 16th century, early 17th century, the King James comes from 1611. So the word evil probably had a particular connotation. For us today, malicious or greedy probably works better. And for me, greedy is especially helpful with this metaphor. So I hope it's helpful for you too. So yes, we're talking about the Apostle Paul, Ephesians 5. So we have two secular sources, we have two biblical sources that encourage us to think about time as a kind of monetary instrument. Maybe we could just simply say time as money, right? Using Benjamin Franklin. So with that in mind, spending our time more carefully is one way to summarize the wisdom that we've just seen above. But for our purposes, many of us likely need some help. We probably need concepts, we need maybe concept maps to help us think about the way that we use time if we aren't used to budgeting our time or managing our time more carefully. Now, before we get to that, our purpose today is how can we rescue our time from possible loss using that phrase that I've inserted in the Apostle Paul's statement there in Ephesians 5. How can we rescue that time from possible loss as carefully as we budget our money? Now, most of us are usually pretty well aware of what kind of money we have in our pockets, maybe what credit limits we have in our credit cards that we reach for our wallets. We probably have a decent sense of our checking account balances, maybe savings account balances. Well, now we're going to talk about all of this in terms of time. So, we're going to talk about a time budget, and I've set up sleep, work, and free time as our categories. Now, the colors are a little washed out up here on the screen, but sleep is more of a blue color than teal. Work is definitely red, and free time is more of a green color. So, red for, work deserves a great deal of attention. Blue for, I'm not really aware of time because I'm under repair for those 7 or 8 hours. And then green for free time in terms of a green light, right? So symbolically, we're going to look at those three categories from that point of view. So each of you should have this handout in front of you. It's of a 24-hour clock. If you don't have this, it's available as a handout over here to your right. And once again, there's a pen available if you need something to write with. So we're conceiving time as a 24-hour clock. Please excuse the Roman interpretation of time, because the Romans like to start their day at midnight, right? We know the Bible does not do that. It starts at sunset. So bear with me as we talk about time on a 24-hour clock, which might feel a little like military time for those of you who've been exposed to the military or maybe how the police tend to regard time in their reports. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to do with your pen or whatever instrument you have with you is to move from the center to the various hours that might represent the three categories that you believe you spend in a 24-hour period of time. So for instance, we're talking maybe from 22 or 23 on the clock to perhaps 6 or 7 might be the block you set aside for sleep. So from the center, you can draw a line to either that 22 or that 23. Maybe for some of you, it's 21. And then draw the other line over here to 5, 6, or 7. And that's going to represent the segment on the clock that is your sleep time. So I'll give you a second to put that together. From the center, you're drawing lines out to represent the block of time you normally reserve for sleep. Anybody who's just joining us, we have handouts over here to the right where you see my sister-in-law, and we have a pen if you need one. Now we're going to do the same thing with work. When do you normally have to show up at work if you work? Is that 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock? Well, from the center, please go to that 7, 8, or 9. And then on the other side, when do you normally stop work? So is that at 14, 15, 16, somewhere in there? That's where you'll draw your other leg. Now, the 12 down here at the bottom represents noon to help you with a reference. In case anybody is looking for noon, noon should normally be at the top on a 12-hour clock, but we're using this to illustrate our time budget for a 24-hour day. So if everything's gone well, you've set aside 7, 8, maybe 9 hours for work. Some of you may be workaholics, so you might involve even more time, which is strictly up to you. Now, presumably, the time we have left over is your free time, your green time. So the time we set aside for work is the red time, the time we set aside for sleep, blue time, and the time that we set aside for free time is green. Green for go, green for, wow, I've got things I want to do, I have tasks that I want to complete, things that I want to get done. That's your green time. Now, because I'm a retired person nowadays, my clock might look a little different from your clock. So you see that I have some blue time set aside for sleep. That's about 8 hours. As it turns out, that was my block of time for today before I got up. But compared to some of you, I might have a little more free time than you're used to. So that puts the onus on me to be even more careful about my time budget. For those of you who don't have as much time that we're calling free time, it's because you probably have to think a little more about, well, what is the nature of what I call free time? And then you see I've set aside some work blocks that I use every day. So I try to maintain this schedule every day. Now, what I'm going to ask you to do for your second task is, with some people around you, would you take a minute to jot down tasks or goals that you have in that work time, that free time that you've set aside? And we want to make sure that everybody has a chance to record 1 or 2 items in each of those blocks to represent what actually happens. Now, before we begin, do you have any questions for me? It's just a simple task. Okay, I want to give you a few minutes with your elbow partners, neighbors that are nearby. Jot down what you typically get done in work, maybe what you typically get done in free time, and then we'll come back together again. So please go ahead and get started. I'll come back to you in about 2 minutes. So as you look at your document in front of you, was there anything that surprised you? Did anybody have a surprise? Anything that was unusual? We had at least one person. So, sir, what was that?
A lot more time than I thought.
Oh, okay. A lot more time than you thought. Sometimes people might say otherwise. So it's good to hear that some people have more flexibility than perhaps they previously thought. Yes, sir.
Now, eating, I didn't put down eating, time for the eating.
Okay.
It's like an afterthought.
All right. So there's eating. There is getting ready for the day, right? When does all of that take place, right? So that's something we have to think about in terms of our free time.
We really struggled as moms with families that were responsible for the blend between work and free time is very amorphous.
Okay, so for moms, there is a fluidity that works back and forth, getting children ready, heading off for work, right? That might help us understand that rigid categories probably aren't fully accurate, right? Yes, ma'am.
That's why I put on mine parenting instead of free time.
Okay, good.
It's parenting time.
Yes. So I'm not surprised that we've heard what we've heard. So let's hold this thought. How many of you were amazed at how crowded your free time was? Was anybody in that category? So moms are going to be in that category. Other folks who might have other obligations, perhaps people who are looking after senior parents, have to think about, whoa, so much of what I thought or could conceive of as free time really isn't free. So I put down a few items: getting ready for the day, meals, travel, getting to work and back from work. Notice that doesn't count actually in that work time, right? So many of us might have much more crowded time when we talk about free time. So I hope that gives us a few insights as we move on. So moving into part 3, most of us are realizing if we're squeezed for time, how can I manage my time more carefully? Make the best use of my time. So time management for me as a younger person was a barrier in terms of accomplishing particular goals, and at times maybe you too have encountered that. As a retired person, I've had to revisit what it means to budget time and try to get the most out of redeeming that time, and redeeming time is where we're trying to go today, so we don't want to forget that goal. How many of you have seen Pareto's principle? Might be pronounced Pareto, because he was an Italian in the late 19th century. The resolution's not coming through very well, but you can see that the claim is to expand one's business with the 80-20 rule. So that's when I first became aware of this concept of the 80-20 rule. You'll see that effort is on the left-hand side, result is on the right-hand side. But if interpreting this graphic isn't especially helpful, we're going to go to the next slide. So yes, it's called the 80-20 rule. Most people probably know it that way. How many have been exposed to the 80-20 rule? Yeah, so a sizable number of people. I'm not surprised. So what's the point we want to pull from this particular graphic, but also this particular concept of time and the use of time? 80% of the results come from 20% of causes, was what Pareto claimed. It's worth considering in terms of the times we're spinning our wheels when we feel like we're not gaining traction, we're not able to go as far as we would like to go. It could be that we need to re-examine the 20% of causes that will deliver the 80% of results that we want from our lives. So we're holding on to that thought because we're taking a bit of a digression as we think about some different models for time management, and then we'll go back to this notion of redeeming time. But as you can detect, redeeming time becomes possible with this concept. If we want to get maximum results, we probably have to concentrate on what is especially meaningful. Locating time for God and for spiritual connection would probably be among those things. I would like to think that would be true for most of us. So you can see that a man by the name of Geron pulled this concept and brought it into American business in 1941, starting in 1941. How many have seen this graphic? Anybody have a chance to see this graphic? Okay, a few people have. I'm not surprised for anybody who's had to be in management. This is a common concept that people have to consider. So notice on the x-axis, there is urgent and not urgent there at the top. And then along the left-hand side on the y-axis, we see what's important, what's not important. And you see in big letters, do, delegate, decide, delete. It's a way for each of us individually to manage our little domains in terms of what we want to get done. Notice that a crisis in the office, or perhaps a crisis in the house, is going to be a good reason to do something fairly quickly. It becomes both urgent and important. But for something that might be urgent but not as important, notice that delegating might be the way to get this done. For a committee of one, we end up delegating to ourselves, right? So that means we have to think about our schedules, we have to think about the appointments, make sure those are all set up, ready to go, and then we proceed with the other parts of a day. So not to belabor this too much, but you can see here in the lower right-hand corner to delete something from a to-do list. It's neither urgent nor important. Could be phone calls, maybe delete upon actually making them, then we delete them from our list. Social media may not be as important, so that's something many people have to consider as they are looking at a time budget. How much of their budget, presumably it's free time, but I've lived in the real world, and during those 7 or 8, 9 hours of work time, I saw people on their phones all the time. And they weren't looking for wisdom, they were looking for connection, right? They were looking for a way to reach out, trying to find some meaningful connection with other people. Notice in this matrix, perhaps putting that kind of thing as the least important thing to get done is not a bad idea. So this is officially known as the Eisenhower matrix. And yes, you're probably thinking Dwight Eisenhower, one of the presidents of the United States, exactly that person, but before he was president, he was a general, right? He looked after significant parts of the Second World War for the United States. So you can probably imagine he was developing this technique so that he could be the most efficient he could be with his time. So the matrix helps us to decide what has to get done now, what should be scheduled later, what should be delegated to other people. So if I'm living in a family of 4 or 5, are there tasks that I can encourage other members of the family to handle? And then, of course, there are those tasks that may not prove to be very important. They're at the bottom of the list, and they might slide off the list because they're unimportant. So I found this adapted by Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and many of you have probably been exposed to Stephen Covey's 7 Habits. For how many of you is that true? Yeah, I'm not surprised. He's considered a major guru when it comes to time management. But where else can I turn? Is there anybody else who can help us with what it means to manage time more effectively? Here's a cute little graphic. The bottom says, eat the frog, but it's actually known in management circles as eat that frog. So I'll give you a second to take a look with me here at the top. If it's your job to eat a frog, best thing to do is to do it in the morning. And if it's your job to eat 2 frogs, best eat the big one first. So once we use a technique like the Eisenhower matrix, we find out what absolutely needs to be done, absolutely urgent, Well, what if that task or those tasks are unpleasant tasks that we have to complete? We probably want to swallow that frog. Yes, that metaphor works for us because it's unclean, right? Frogs are scavengers. Could be eat that snail or whatever is repugnant, eat that crawfish. The notion is, oh, I really don't want to eat that, but I really do need to get this done. So, eat that frog. So before starting our day, have some of us practice what it means to avoid procrastination and just get that big task done as soon as possible. I'll be among those of you who are willing to admit that I've done that a number of times when I really didn't want to do something, but I also didn't want to be guilty of procrastination. Could it be that making time for God and setting time aside for prayer, Bible study, meditation, sometimes fasting, could those tasks be frogs from time to time? It's something we have to ask ourselves as we think about time management. So Brian Tracy, Eat That Frog, made a great deal of money starting in 2001 on selling people on 21 different things they could do to make sure they consume those frogs and avoid procrastination. So why should you care about any of the models that you've seen? Well, it's because most of you are probably busy people. So that means you probably need techniques that will help you manage your time as well as you possibly can. And chances are, like I just said, techniques, more than one, to help us keep reviewing a more effective use of time. So remember, one of our goals today is to locate free time and to manage that free time a little bit better. So now we're able to get back to what it means to redeem time for spiritual connection. So we took a bit of a digression, but I hope a relevant digression before we move on to where we want to go here in part 4. So let's talk a little more about time management and specifically what it means to manage free time more effectively. We've already noticed that free time is, for many of us, probably more crowded than we would prefer. We want to free some of that up, not just want, we need to free some of this up for spiritual connection. So I'm going to take you to an unusual place to provide some motivation. I'm taking you to Malachi chapter 3, verses 8 and then 10. And notice that comment about tithes and offerings should probably come into our discussion right now. So let's start with verse 8. Will a man rob God? Yet you have robbed me. But you say, wherein have we robbed thee? And God responds, in tithes and offerings. We've been talking about time as income. Now it's probably time to talk about tithing on that time and offerings from that time. So here's verse 10. Bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in mine house, and prove me now herewith, says the Lord of hosts, if I will not open to you the windows of heaven and pour out a blessing, that there shall not be room enough to receive it. My hope is that tithing and setting aside offerings for your monetary income has been so much of a common practice in your life that you have felt the blessings that have come from that. There was a time when I didn't tithe as regularly and I didn't provide offerings as I should have, and my life wasn't going as well. But once I recommitted to those two practices, my life took off in ways that I did not imagine, in ways I did not understand at the time. I was an early 20-something trying to find my way in the world. Ironically, this was just as the state of California had invaded the Church of God there in Pasadena. That was a very confusing time, very disorienting time. So a scripture like this helped me to get reoriented. Plus, I had some help from a ministerial friend who helped me get my life back on track, for which I'm extremely grateful. Let's think about the Sabbath as holy time. So that's 24 hours in a 7-day week, and it's about 14.3% of 168 hours. So those 168 hours are the hours we have in a week. The time reduces to 9.5, roughly a tithe of our time increase, when we subtract those 8 hours. So when we subtract those 8 hours, we have 16 waking hours, which is about 1/10 of that 168 hours that we have. That works out pretty nicely in terms of thinking about our waking hours on the Sabbath would be a kind of tithe on our time increase. Yes, it's commanded by God, but so are tithes. So looking at time as a kind of monetary instrument, you and I regularly set aside that time every week. So in terms of redeeming time from our time income, what are we doing for the other 6 days? So it's probably wise then that you and I think about a budget for that free time. And as I indicated in my case, I am time wealthy when it comes to free time because I'm not getting ready for work. I'm not looking after children, right? So I feel more pressure to be as efficient as I can be and to be as responsible as I can be with free time. Maybe some of you are in that very same place. Now, for those of you who have crowded free time, talking about a budget is especially helpful. But for those of us who are time wealthy with our free time, we probably have to be a little more wise about how we're spending our time. So, in front of each of you, on the back side of your 24-hour clock, is an instrument that I use. I've been doing this for years. And you can see that I've quoted Benjamin Franklin in the upper right-hand corner. So you can tell that that quotation from Benjamin Franklin has especially been helpful for me, and I hope it'll be helpful for you. You can see in the upper left-hand corner we have a place for what deserves high priority. So I'm making some use of the Eisenhower matrix, and then anything that has low priority I've put in the upper right-hand side. And then you see that there are 7 days in this calendar, and as I've indicated, I'm especially trying to be careful with the free time that I have. Yes, there are things that I have to get done, but then there are those things that I would like to get done. So I'm willing to admit that I don't always budget my time as carefully as I need to in terms of making time for spiritual connection, making sure that each day there's prayer, Bible study, that there is an attempt to make a meaningful connection with God in a way that lets him know that I care about the fact that I'm still alive, that I have that income of time that's coming in. So let's create a formula statement so that we can talk about, well, how much time should we be dedicating to God for those other 6 days? So remember, we have 168 hours in a week. We're subtracting those 56 hours for sleep. That's the ideal if we're thinking 8 hours a night. So that gives us 112 hours left over. So when we subtract those 56 hours for work, then that sets us up for a little under 60 hours for free time. Well, let's talk in terms of dividing that by 10, setting up a tithe. Remember, we're looking at the entire week, not the week without the Sabbath. So we've included the Sabbath here in our complete accounting. So that leaves us roughly 6 hours as a weekly offering for the other 6 days. So when we divide that number 6 by 6 days, that leaves us with about an hour each day that we could dedicate toward God. Our purpose today, remember, was to locate time for spiritual connection. The rationale we're using is from Malachi chapter 3. We're careful to tithe with our income. We're careful to set aside offerings for our income for the holy days whenever we gather for the holy days. What about using that analogy for the time that comes into our accounts each week? If you need a rationale, one that provides a little onus, that is pressure to commit, talking about tithes and offerings in our time might be a way to help. The Sabbath, those waking hours, would be our tithe of the week. Our offering the other 6 days would be roughly an hour each of those days. We probably don't often think about the time we have in terms of offerings. We do think about the Sabbath as that special time that we set aside, but now, using this analogy of a time budget, we have some rationale for allocating the time, setting aside time the way that we would set it aside. So now with that same document that you have in front of you, I've set up this particular week. And I'm showing you that I'm working to put Bible study, meditation, prayer at the top of my priority list each week, making sure that I am dedicating time to those activities each day throughout the week. The Sabbath, as we've already noted, has already been set aside. So now we're talking about Sunday through Friday, first day of the week through the sixth day of the week. Your document in front of you is for you to make whatever notes you would like to make and to provide whatever incentives you might need to help you engage better with your expenditure of time, especially when it comes to locating time for God. Now, I told you that here at the end, we wanted to go through some follow-up, and we want to allow for some discussion. So we've taken a look at this notion of finding time to connect with God, to locate spiritual connection as much as we can. We noted that that's an unusual way, perhaps, to think about setting aside time. So how did talking about time as income or as a form of money help or hinder our discussion of locating time for spiritual connection? I'm going to invite you to talk to your elbow partners, people that are around you. I want to give you a minute or so for you to think about that. Provide some feedback for me. Did it help? Did it hinder in any kind of way? Somebody like me who puts together material like this needs to know. Any questions before we begin? Please talk among yourselves. And for those of you who want to contribute, in a couple of minutes, I'll come back to you. So we want to go back to this issue. Did talking about time as income or as money help or did it hinder? We want to hear both sides if both apply, if you think they apply. So for those of you who thought it helped, any thoughts in ways in which it helped? Okay, we have a couple of people back here. Yes, sir. Yes.
Like now I feel a little bit guilty that I'm like, oh, I gotta spend more time aside going forward in order to make up that deficit.
So I think most of us appreciate that notion of purchasing something big and allocating a certain amount in order to make that purchase that's coming. All of us have probably had that kind of experience. So thinking of time in that same kind of way, and then, oh, I missed a payment or I missed setting aside a certain amount of time, so now I need to make up for the time that I've lost. That puts a little bit of pressure on us, doesn't it? To be a little more consistent and to stay with it a little more carefully. So I appreciate that comment. Yes, sir.
I thought it was helpful, especially when you think of time as something that God gives you, like money, and He wants for you to use that to glorify Him and like study and like look into that. So if you have a whole lot of free time and you're kind of doing other things and like you're not using your time very wisely, and you set it and you have to purposely tell yourself, okay, I'm gonna set like you said, like an hour, kind of tight. You don't want to rob God of your time and that relationship that you're trying to build with Him. So I thought it was helpful.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that. Thinking about an allocation and thinking also about time as an increase was helpful. Now, did this concept hinder anybody? Wasn't an interference? Okay, we have one comment.
Not complete hindrance, but
Okay.
at the beginning, as you were talking about budgeting and money, I wasn't quite catching on yet. It was like, where's this going? What do you mean? But when you brought out Malachi, it was like, oh, ding, and the light goes on.
Good.
So it was a struggle to come to it myself, but you helped tie it together.
Okay, so using Malachi, I agree, is probably extremely helpful in terms of thinking about time as an increase and then setting aside tithes and offerings. So I'm sorry it came a little late, but that's okay. It came, and that's the important part. I'm happy about that. So because of time, I'm going to take you to this next issue. So some popular styles of time management. We looked at 3. Did they help or hinder your thinking about locating time for a spiritual connection?
You're looking for feedback now?
Yeah, so you've had a chance to talk a little bit, so maybe some thoughts that you had with the previous question can play a role now. Yes, ma'am.
I think it helped me because as far as the time management charts and things, I find myself, when I get up in the morning, I take my phone with me and sit and have my cup of coffee, and it's like, I've got my Bible study sitting right there next to my chair. Why am I holding this thing? And I do it every morning, it seems like, because I just told Amanda, I said, I need to leave my phone in my room for that 45 minutes that I'm up, and then that will force me to pick up my Bible and do something. Because I think it's a matter of having something to do with your hands, kind of thing. And there you are with your phone scrolling for, oh, I need to go get dressed for work or whatever. And, so it's like, leave the phone in the room and then worry about it later. There's nothing pressing going on. If there was, then they'd call the house or something.
Right, or you would...
There's another way they can reach me if it was something really major.
Good. So we've just heard a comment that is related to what we've been discussing, and that is there anything that keeps us from managing our time effectively? And for some of us, that might be our phones, and it could be the way in which we're using our phones. So in my case, I have to be careful because as soon as I get up and grab that cup of coffee, I like to get into some crosswords. And I use my phone to get that done. So I have to be careful not to be too engaged with that because I have other connections, one of those being with God, that I want to make, right? So I don't want that phone to get in the way, and I want to put my hands on something else. Now, because of my background, I'm a print literacy person as opposed to a digital literacy person. So that means I intentionally pick up a print copy of the Bible and use it as opposed to a digital copy on my phone. So for me, it feels more genuine, it feels more real to engage Scripture that way. Also, research shows that when people are scanning pages, physical pages, they are much more likely to put that information in their working memory, and that working memory, providing the information stays long enough, goes into what we call long-term storage. And for those who are using phones, there is so much scrolling involved, scrolling and swiping, that people don't have the sense of a full page. So with my background, I'm well aware of a number of studies that have pointed out that we're probably handing phones to our young people too soon, because they haven't developed the skills for print literacy. What it means to hold a book, make use of it, make notes perhaps in the margins, however people want to engage with the text, so that it feels real and feels dimensional, if that makes sense. It feels palpable. We have our hands on it as opposed to something in the virtual world out there. Did this information on time management hinder anybody in any way? Was that troublesome? Okay, we've got a comment back here. I think that is a helpful comment. We don't want this analogy to apply so much pressure that we feel this heavy obligation. We want it to be a joy, right? We want it, hey, I'm managing my time and I've got this time set aside for God. That's a good thing. But there is that potential that it could be something negative. And I appreciate that reference to the Apostle Paul. We had another comment up here.
I use my phone and I just turn on my UCG app and listen to the radio.
So that means you're getting some scripture exposure that way, right? Yes. So some of us prefer more of an auditory experience. In fact, for those of you that might struggle with the amount of time you've set aside for reading the Bible, you could get an auditory version of the scriptures that you're looking at, and you can read along with that auditory track. And I've done this with students. For some students who have difficulty learning, it's been an effective tool to hear it and to read it at the same time. So for some of you who might need that, those tools, as you're well aware, are fully available. So our discussion of tithing our time, once again, I'm wondering if that hindered or helped. I've already heard a few comments that seem to indicate that it helped. Did talking about setting aside time offerings every day, did that hinder anybody? It might be related to the comment that we heard earlier. Yes, sir.
Well, it definitely helped because if you take the time to take a look at it, there are so many distractions in the world, and that distractions becomes a daily routine. And then you realize if you can identify it, and you can come to a consensus that, hey, I need to eliminate this from my life, from my time, and get that time back that I can give to God.
Yes.
Definitely helped.
Right. Good, good. I'm glad to hear that. We have another comment back here.
I think it helps me in the sense that even though I'm devoting about that much time, that would be a minimum. But also, it helps me stay focused. You know, like, when I was a young mom with a couple of kids that I homeschooled, it was like really hard to squeeze it all in. So, and I tended to look at Bible study as a chore. But what I do now is journaling. You know, kids are grown and fun, so I have that time even though I work. For me, journaling makes the Bible fun, and
Good.
before I knew it, an hour's gone by. You know, I've got that time, so yeah.
Excellent, good. So we haven't talked about tools that go along with the Bible study because we've been focusing on just arranging for the time, right? That was our critical focus for this particular presentation. But another presentation, another seminar probably should be dedicated to tools that support Bible study, tools that support prayer, and tools that support meditation. Fasting we could include. So if your thoughts have started to move in that direction, that's excellent, because I think that's the next logical step to take, even though that's not specifically our purpose for today. Well, because of time, we should probably move on to this issue here. So what other techniques for locating time for God have you used that have been profitable for you? I was going to allow for time to discuss among ourselves, but we don't have much time. So for those of you who've perhaps already thought about this, is there anybody who's using other techniques that you have found helpful, perhaps techniques that the rest of us could use?
There was this cute little meme decades ago that I saw that was a little prayer. It says, "Dear Lord in heaven, I haven't cussed anyone out today. I haven't sinned. I haven't done any, and I thank you very much. But now I'm going to need your help because I'm fixing to get out of bed."
Oh,
So I use that as a motivation. It's like, okay, that's the best time. As soon as I roll out of bed, hit my knees, and just spend that time. My Bible's there next to me, And then at night, go to sleep. I have a hard time sleeping in a quiet house because I'm just by myself. So I have an audio Bible that's set with a timer, and I listen to scripture until I fall asleep.
that's probably not a bad way to go to sleep, right?
I start the day visually and
Okay.
prayerfully, and I end the day audibly and prayerfully.
Outstanding. So the technique would involve immediately dedicating time to God at the front end before too much takes up the day, right? And for those of us who maybe like jumping into the day as opposed to sliding into the day, we might have to think of that dedicated time in a slightly different way. But if we're thinking in terms of an offering, right, we want to thank God at the beginning, thank God at the end. So using Scripture as bookends, as a way to make time for God, it makes sense to me. So I can see why that would work. For anybody else? Yes, sir.
I would say, if you're using a digital device, to have specific intent before you pick up the device of what you're wanting to do. If you're wanting to go to a Bible app, go there. Don't go to Facebook first, because you'll find yourself going all over that phone and not getting to where you want to go.
Sure. So we would call that digital wandering, right? Yeah, and some people would call it doom scrolling if we get caught in a particular application and find ourselves moving from one thing to the next. So that's another helpful piece of advice. We need to be intentional about the devices that we have in terms of picking them up.
Yeah,
That's right.
with intent.
With intent, be intentional, think ahead. I'm using my device to get this done or to accomplish this task. Yes, ma'am.
Another thing that might help is find someone that can hold you accountable.
Yes. For those of us who have a spouse or a family member, right? We might have to ask those folks to help us be accountable. Yeah. We have enough time for one more. Any other technique that you have found useful in terms of dedicating time to God? Yes, ma'am. Okay. And do you find yourself following up after you've had that auditory experience? You tell yourself, oh, I'm going to look into this issue, or I'm going to look into that issue when I have some time later today, or maybe certainly by tomorrow. Have you had that kind of experience? Yeah. Right. That's right. So we might be inspired to talk to other people. Hey, I was listening to this sermon, and I found this particular concept interesting. Let's follow up. What's been your experience with this particular concept? Well, I wanted to leave you with some contact information so that you can follow up with me if you want to. So my email you see up there on the screen, my phone number, you can either text me or you can give me a call. So as an ABC faculty member, I want to make sure that I'm making myself available to you. And if you have any further follow-up, any additional thoughts, I would definitely like to hear from you. And the final thing I want to say is thank you so much for being here, for your interest in this topic. And my hope is that the rest of the day is profitable. And of course, your tomorrow is even more profitable. The Sabbath that's coming up, that's profitable. Thinking about time as a weekly income and trying to use it to the best of our ability. Thanks, everybody.